What if death isn't the end? What if your mind doesn't shut off when your heart stops, but detaches, watching from somewhere else? It sounds like science fiction. It's not. And one man has been gathering proof for over 30 years. Dr. Pim van Lommel, cardiologist, death researcher, former skeptic, never set out to confirm an afterlife. He simply noticed a pattern. Some patients died and returned with stories, not vague tales of tunnels and lights, detailed accounts, documented memories, measurable data. Patients with flat EEGs, no pulse, no oxygen, describing events from the moments they were clinically dead. They watched their resuscitation from above. They recalled childhood moments with stunning clarity. They described real-world events, later confirmed by medical staff. So here's the question: if the brain was offline, who was recording the memory? Is death really the end? Let's be real. Death is the big one, the final boss, the unskippable cutscene. It's the fear behind all other fears, the one waiting quietly at the end of every breath. And most of us have heard the story we're expected to believe. You are your brain. When the brain dies, so do you. Game over. Thanks for playing. That's the version handed down by materialist science. It's clean, clinical, and if we're honest, terrifying. Because if it's true, then everything you are, your memories, your personality, your love, your guilt vanishes the instant your neurons stop firing. But Dr. Pim van Lommel disagrees, and so do the 20 million people around the world who've reported near-death experiences under conditions that should have made consciousness impossible. Now, let's be clear. This isn't a ghost story. No incense, no chanting, no cherubs with harps. This is about evidence, and the evidence is strange. Dr. van Lommel wasn't some fringe mystic. He was a straight-shooting cardiologist trained in the golden age of defibrillators and ICU miracles. In the late 1960s, he helped pioneer coronary care in the Netherlands. He lived by science, shocks, paddles, measurable outcomes, until one day a patient flatlined, was revived, and woke up angry. Not because he had been dead, but because, in his words, we dragged him out of something radiant. A tunnel, a light, music unlike anything on Earth. That moment haunted van Lommel. At first, he brushed it aside. Science doesn't have time for stories. But the stories kept coming. More patience, same pattern. Different details, same impossibility. Consciousness when there should have been none. It wasn't random. It was repeatable, a glitch in the materialist matrix. And so, van Lommel did what real scientists do. He investigated. The result was one of the most respected studies on near-death experiences ever published in the Lancet. And it pointed to a possibility few dared consider. Maybe the brain doesn't generate consciousness. Maybe it receives it, like a radio. Which means when the brain shuts down, consciousness doesn't end, it disconnects. In this video, we're diving into that crossroads where science, death, and philosophy collide. We'll examine the studies, the data, the skeptics, and the implications. If death isn't the end, then what are we doing with this tiny sliver of existence? So, sharpen your attention, but keep your skepticism within reach, because this isn't just about dying, it's about rethinking what it means to be alive. Let's rewind. Imagine flatlining, clinically dead, no pulse, no brainwaves, total blackout, and yet you're hovering above your body, watching doctors scramble, hearing every word. You notice the music playing, the blue card in the corner, the red scissors on the second shelf. You're dead, but more awake than ever. Then you're resuscitated. You describe everything that happened while your EEG showed nothing. Flatline. And the details? All confirmed. Every one. By doctors, by nurses. This isn't folklore. It's in peer-reviewed science. Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist with no spiritual agenda, led one of the most rigorous clinical studies on near-death experiences ever published. From 1988 to 2001, he followed 344 cardiac arrest survivors across 10 hospitals in the Netherlands. Every patient had been declared clinically dead. No respiration, no heartbeat, no brain activity. And yet 18% of them reported vivid experiences, not dreams, not hallucinations, events, They saw their own bodies from above, watched medical procedures unfold in real time, traveled through tunnels, encountered blinding light, reunited with deceased loved ones, relived entire lives in panoramic emotional flashbacks. Some felt an overwhelming sense of unity or truth. They returned, changed. And it wasn't tied to religion. Christians, atheists, Muslims, Hindus. It didn't matter. The experience transcended belief systems. It struck something deeper, archetypal, even primordial. Dr. van Lommel went full scientist. He compared the 18% with the 82% who experienced nothing. He tested every variable: length of cardiac arrest, drugs administered, personal beliefs, psychological state, fear of death, time unconscious. Result? No correlation. Nothing explained why some experienced it and others didn't, which raised a chilling question. If the brain was down, what was doing the experiencing? One case shook him. A man flatlined, then revived. He described precisely how staff worked on him, who stood where, what tool was used for intubation, how many times the defibrillator was fired, even a joke someone made. He should have remembered nothing, yet he remembered everything. We tell ourselves maybe the brain was still active, just enough to simulate a dying hallucination. But EEG studies show the brain shuts down 10 to 20 seconds after cardiac arrest. Electrical silence, consciousness gone. And still, these accounts emerge, often minutes later, vivid, coherent, sharper than waking memories. One patient said it felt more real than real. But what does this mean? If even one of these stories holds up, it breaks the rulebook. Either consciousness exists without a working brain, or everything we believe about the brain is wrong. Maybe both. Maybe your brain isn't the source of who you are. Maybe it's the receiver, a filter, a tuning device. When it breaks, the signal doesn't vanish. It's still out there, broadcasting. So when your body dies, maybe you don't end. Maybe you just unplug from this frequency. And if that's true, then everything changes. Let me ask you something that'll mess with your head. When your Wi-Fi cuts out, do you assume the internet no longer exists? Of course not. You don't call the FBI and declare the cloud is gone. You reboot the router, because you know the device isn't the source of the data. It's just the receiver. Now imagine your brain works the same way. What if your thoughts, your memories, even your identity aren't locked inside your skull, but part of something larger, something non-local? That's not spiritual speculation anymore. That's what near-death science is quietly starting to suggest. Mainstream neuroscience has long taught that consciousness is a product of brain activity. Shut off the brain and consciousness disappears. That's been the dogma for decades. But here's the catch. No one's ever proved it. We've mapped the neural correlates of thought. What lights up when you hear music, feel joy, or see red. But mapping isn't explaining. Correlation isn't causation. If the brain creates consciousness the way fire creates smoke, then extinguishing the brain should leave nothing. But near-death experiences suggest otherwise. People report vivid, coherent, deeply meaningful events when their brains show no activity. That's not smoke, that's a signal. Dr. Pim van Lommel's theory pushes this further and deeper. He proposes that consciousness exists as a field, independent, non-local. Your brain? Just a temporary receiver, an organic antenna tuned to the frequency of you. When the brain functions normally, you get a narrow, localized version of self, memories, emotions, a timeline. But during trauma, cardiac arrest, or death, that narrow bandwidth opens, and consciousness expands. People describe this shift as timeless, everything happening at once, boundless knowledge, a sense of merging with the universe, an overwhelming feeling of homecoming. According to van Lommel, our waking consciousness is just a small part of this non-local consciousness. Put simply, life may be the dream, death might be the wake-up. Think of your brain like a cracked phone screen. It works, barely. You can still text, browse, scroll, but the actual data? That's stored in the cloud. Now kill the phone? Do the photos vanish? No. They're waiting on the cloud, ready for another device. That's van Lommel's model. Consciousness isn't created, it's accessed. Of course, skeptics push back, as they should. Science thrives on questions, not belief. The go-to objections? Oxygen deprivation, DMT bursts in the brain, wishful thinking, psychological projection. But Van Lommel and his team accounted for all that. Oxygen levels varied, but didn't predict near-death experiences. Medications didn't matter. Length of arrest? No correlation. Religious background? Irrelevant. Fear of death? Nope. And here's the kicker. These weren't fuzzy, dreamlike impressions. They were hyper-real, in many cases more vivid than waking life. And in 98% of documented cases, the memories were factually accurate, verified by hospital staff. Hallucinations don't do that. The fallback argument, the brain must have made it up afterward, starts to sound less scientific, more like denial. So here's the philosophical payload. If consciousness exists without a brain, then we're not dealing with anomalies. We're staring down the collapse of materialism. We're confronting the possibility that death isn't annihilation, it's transition, from local to non-local, from temporary to timeless. If that's true, then neurons don't create awareness, flesh doesn't define identity, and death isn't an end. Let that sit with you, because if your brain is only tuning in, then the real question becomes, what's broadcasting on the other side? Imagine waking up in a hospital bed. You were dead, no pulse, no brain activity, and now you're back. But something's different. Not wrong, just vast. Like your soul rebooted with new software downloaded from somewhere beyond this world. This is what many near-death experiencers describe, not just the tunnel or the light, but what follows, the return. Because the real story isn't just what people see when they die, it's who they become when they come back. Dr. Pim van Lommel found something astonishing. People who had near-death experiences didn't move on like it was a strange dream. They changed profoundly. He followed up with them 2 years, even 8 years later. The shift was consistent and unmistakable. They lost their fear of death, but not recklessly, more like peacefully. They no longer believed in life after death. They knew it. They realigned their lives. Money, status, attention, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was connection, compassion, authenticity. As one patient put it, it's not about what you own. It's about who you are when no one's watching. Many gained heightened intuition and empathy. Some could sense others' emotions more clearly. Others felt drawn to serve through healing, teaching, or creating. Something awakened in them, something more human. And here's the kicker. These transformations didn't happen in the control group, only in those who'd crossed that invisible line. Something happened in those moments of clinical death, something that touched the core. But not all of it was peace and light. Many experiencers described the return as deeply isolating. How do you explain to your spouse, your doctor, your friends that you floated outside your body and met a being made of light? Many were dismissed, some were ridiculed, others stayed silent for decades. One man said, "I came back with the truth, but I had no one to tell it to." Van Lommel found that over 70% of NDE survivors ended up divorced. Not because of trauma, but transformation. They weren't the same people. Their priorities had changed. Their relationships couldn't keep up. So here's the real question. What if they're telling the truth? What if they cry when they speak of it, not from fear, but from longing? What if they didn't want to come back, but did? What if the life they lived before now feels like a dim echo? What if they returned with less fear, more love, and a sense of purpose that no drug, no therapist, no doctrine could ever give? Are we really going to write that off as brain chemistry? Or is it possible, just possible, that they touched something real? And here's where it lands hard. If death is only an ending, why does meeting it make people more alive? Why do they return kinder, clearer, calmer? Maybe death isn't what gives life meaning. Maybe it's what lies beyond death that reshapes it all. So instead of asking, is there life after death? Maybe we should be asking, what kind of life are we living before it? Because if Van Lommel's research is even half right, if consciousness survives, then death isn't extinction. It's transition, the curtain call before the encore, not an ending, a return. And maybe, just maybe, the dying are the ones who truly know how to live. If what you just heard made you question everything you thought you knew about death, wait till you see what's been done to your mind while alive. In the next video, we're asking something even more dangerous. Are we being programmed to believe in false ideas? From social media algorithms to cultural conditioning, this one pulls back the curtain on the beliefs you never chose, but still follow. Click here if you're ready to unplug from the matrix.